Hi, sociology students. This is your substitute face-to-face lecture this week in sociology class. We're going to continue with our topics of social stratification. You should have your notes for social stratification this unit open in front of you while you're watching this lecture, because I'm going to refer to things we've previously taken notes on, like Max Weber's concept of life chances and how we broke down that concept in more detail than what our textbook author does, so that we can use that those concepts and that two-part definition, breaking it down into the things that we need for subsistence and the things that we need for comfort and advancement and enjoyment, breaking it down into those two different components. We're going to use that to help us analyze and understand style of life and average standard of living, two concepts that are going to be part of today's lecture, two concepts you'll need to take notes on. We're going to use that broken down life chances definition to analyze style of life and average standard of living in the United States and then also globally. So there's going to be two lectures that you have to watch this week and substitute for the two classes that I'm going to be gone. But you go ahead and take notes on both of them. And no, I don't have a whiteboard behind me to write anything down for you, but I'm going to go slowly enough and emphasize which concepts should be the bare bones of your notes. And then, of course, you can stop this video at any time and see all my weird facial expressions that happen when you pause it randomly, and write down anything that you need to fill in some meat on those bones, those bare bones notes that you're going to be taking here. Okay, so in our last class we talked about Karl Marx and Eric Wright, those two social theorists. I mean, Karl Marx is certainly, lots of different disciplines claim him. Some people call him an economist, a philosopher, a historian, a sociology, we're claiming him. Also, as we pointed out in class, some people know him as the father of communism. His role in analyzing society, a capitalist society, gives sociology a lot of the foundation for our conflict theory that we learned way back in August during our first few weeks of class. So yeah, conflict theory with the haves or the have-nots. Of course, now you have those very college level words, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So you know the bourgeoisie are the haves or the capitalist class, and the proletariat are the have-nots or the working class. And now all those ERBs that have those words in them make more sense to you, right? And your other classes will too. Those are very good words to know, so that when you come across them in reading for political science class or history class or economics class or any of the other classes that you're taking as part of your degree plan, you're going to see these college level words. You're going to read them in your assignments. You're going to hear your other professors talk about them, so it's very important to know. Bourgeoisie, proletariat, that is the two-rung ladder design. If you're using a ladder as the macro scale social structure model, and the rungs on the ladder as the categories of people. In Karl Marx's model, those were economic models. They were basically designed around ownership and control of the means of production and distribution, or do you own your labor, and do you have to sell your labor for wages? So that was an economic model, and then Eric Wright, our modern day contemporary theorist, takes Marx's model that we drew and talked about in class last week. He takes that model and adds two more rungs to the ladder. He breaks it down a little bit more with a managerial class. The very top class, or the capitalists, would be the corporate world, which has a global scope, and the managerial class would be the key people in that global world that manage huge sectors of economies for an entire nation or for an entire region of the world for corporations like Sony or Apple or Toyota or those kinds of corporations. So the managerial class, we're not talking about the night manager at the Waffle House. We're talking about the regional manager for Southeast Asia for Sony, for instance. And then in the small business class, that would be, for instance, somebody like we mentioned, a local celeb, because of his ads on TV, Steve Landers, who owns several different, I don't know how many, car dealerships around our general area, and maybe other states too. I don't know, but he owns those. But he's a small business owner, and that's where, or the small business class that Eric Wright would add to that ladder, because he sort of makes it possible for the Sony Corporation, for the regional manager of the Toyota Corporation, that runs this area of the world, and then the Toyota Corporation itself to make the big bucks that they do. And then as a small business owner, he also employs people like us to work at his dealerships and provide the services that that we know and love, and some of us, have bought there from him. So anyway, and then there's the working class on the bottom. So he uses some of the same terminology that Karl Marx does, with capitalist class on the top and working class on the bottom, and breaks it down into what some people say is a more manageable, or more realistic, I guess is the word that I want, breakdown of the way society looks in general. Okay, so today, so there's a quick recap of some of the stuff you should have had in your notes, and not just the most recent class that we had. But today, what you need to take notes on are the foundational pieces, the classical theories of social stratification from your friend and mine, Max Weber, who gave us that term, life chances. Remember, his name is spelled W-E-B-E-R, but we pronounce it Weber. So Max Weber studied social stratification also, and he disagreed with Marx that it's merely like an economic situation. He added some different components to his theories of social stratification. He added specifically 3 different categories that he said don't stand alone, but we combine these 3 mentally. We combine these 3 categories to classify people into different positions in society, classify categories of people. Remember, we're talking macro scale stuff here. Even though I might use the word individual, or I might use the word people, think of this on the macro scale. So he's looking at society as a whole, and he's looking at what are the factors that determine people's rank within a capitalist society. So he came up with 3, in his observations, 3 different factors. One of them is called wealth. Wealth is something that, according to Weber, all of us own. I remember hearing my sociology teacher tell me that back when, I don't know, I was like 19. I can't remember how old I was when I took Intro to Sociology for the first time, and I was barely making it. I was trying to live in an apartment by myself, and car payment, etc., and I had nothing to my name. I was eating ramen noodle pretty much 3 meals a day. They were 10 cents each back then. I don't know how much they are now. But anyway, I remember thinking, I don't have wealth, when my sociology teacher said, all of us have wealth. But if you listen carefully to Max Weber's definition of wealth, which you need to take notes about, then yes, according to the way he classified what wealth is, all of us have at least some. So wealth is made up of certain components like income. So income is going to be the wages we have, the salary that we get, alimony if we get that, any kind of support, a grant. Maybe you're getting student loans and you get a Pell Grant, for instance. That would be part of your income. But wealth, to Max Weber, also includes the value of the property that we own. We've talked before about how the degree that you're working on is your intellectual property. It's going to get you money later. But also your textbooks, if you have a computer, or if you have a car, or any of the items that you own have value, and they add value to your daily life and to your ability to get more income, to get more wealth, right? So, excuse me, oh, my nose is itching. Okay, so wealth is one of the 3 factors that Max Weber said that we use to classify people and rank people, because clearly we can look at income levels and we can say, a lawyer is here and a Taco Bell worker is here, as far as income goes, just randomly picked professions there. But Max Weber said we don't really stop there, that there's two other factors that we use in combination with wealth. We apply two other factors to the situation to evaluate what is going on, or how, not what's going on, but evaluate how we place people within that social ranking system. So we have wealth, but another one is power. Like, how much influence, how much ability do you have as an individual, or does the category of people have as a category of people in society? How much power, by the social facts that exist in society, by the social norms that exist in society, how much ability do you have to get the world to work on your behalf? How easy of a time do you have it getting things to happen for yourself? How difficult of a time do you have it getting things to work out the way you want them to work out? Are the policies that exist in society, are they in your favor? Is it easy for you to follow those laws and to understand the background and the reasoning behind those laws? Or do they kind of work against your style of life, and against your way of thinking, you know? So power is a complicated word here, because we're not talking about people having, only people having power who are in government and who can make policies. But the people in power who are in government and who can make policies are a certain category of people. So the more an individual has in common with that category of people, the more power they have in society. They inherit it at birth. Just like we inherit patriarchy, for instance. So patriarchy, we've talked briefly about in our class before, and we're going to discuss it a lot toward the end of this unit, back when we have our face-to-face sessions again. But patriarchy is an organizational structure in society, in government, in inheritance patterns, in social life. It's an organizational structure that puts males at the center and puts males in positions of power. And this is historically what we come from. We inherited that system at birth. It's not anybody's fault. It's the system that we inherited, and all of us participate in that system. So for instance, when we're talking about power, I'm mentioning patriarchy here because when we're talking about power in society, men tend to have more advantages than females in a patriarchal system. So this is the macro level concept that we're talking about here. So, so this is not just, do you have more power than I do? Are you going to win an arm wrestling or something? This is not that kind of power. And it might not even be a kind of power that the man sitting next to you at the table in sociology class even realizes is something he inherited at birth. And we can go deeper into this and get more classifications for these categories of people. For instance, Caucasian males in our situation have even more power than non-Caucasian males in our society. So Max Weber looked at that kind of concept of power, and he said, yes, we do have wealth as a major component to to calculating who's on the top rungs of society, who's on the middle rungs, and who's down on the bottom rungs of society. But we don't just leave it with wealth or income. Excuse me. We also add power, that component of power, to it, and so we combine those two factors with a third. And the third factor that we combine is called prestige. And I'm sure you're familiar with that word. Prestige has to do with the amount of respect that people, individuals, positions hold in society. It's closely linked with power. It's closely linked with income. Prestige is an amount of social respect that comes along with the position that you occupy. It comes along with your status. When we talked about status symbols in chapter 4, one of the reasons why we talked about how, I don't remember what cars we used as an example of a status symbol, but for instance, we said that a Honda will get you from point A to point B. But does a Mercedes, does getting to point A to point B in a Mercedes, is that something different? Does it represent something different? And if your answer is yes, like a Honda is not exactly the same thing as a Mercedes, then you're talking about the core of what prestige means in society. So I used this profession, lawyer, a minute ago. And that has a certain amount of education required. It has a certain income that we assume. It has a certain prestige, therefore, because of that. And we might think, oh, wow, we're a lawyer. We're proud to say that. Some of you might be surprised to know that diesel mechanics quite often make just as much or more per hour than a lawyer does, with far fewer years of education and a lot of on-the-job training that they can get. I mean, you should get, some classical training in diesel mechanics also. But a diesel mechanic is, when we say that, a lot of us probably haven't been encouraged to investigate those kinds of careers for ourselves because I don't know why, but they don't really have the same amount of prestige as lawyer does or doctor or something, but your style of life, your standard of living can be quite similar to a lawyer if you're a diesel mechanic, and a good one. They get paid like $65 an hour or something, $80 an hour or something like that. And you can have an income quite similar to an attorney. But is the prestige the same? And when I say attorney and I say diesel mechanic, in your mind, are we getting to the same kind of issue of, the Honda to the Mercedes, right? So there's other factors, because we've just said that their income is equal, right? Those two positions, their income is equal. So it's about more than just income, in other words. Max Weber cited and gave us a foundation for understanding that classifying people on a macro scale, putting them in categories based on their position in society, is more than just an economic thing. It's more than just wealth or income. It has other abstract factors associated with it. The other two abstract factors that he cited are power and prestige. And when you combine wealth in the way that he defined it, remember there's multiple components that go into the way he defined wealth. So when you combine wealth, what do you own? What is your income earning potential? What is your actual income? There's your wealth. When you combine that with the power position that you have in society, with the prestige that your position is given in society according to social norms, then where is your position in that social framework? Excuse me. Okay. So that is Max Weber in a nutshell, and he came up with 6 different divisions of people in society. Remember, Karl Marx came up with 2. Max Weber is also a classical theorist, so he came up with 6 different positions of society. You'll find them in chapter 7. You'll see the graphic in chapter 7 that's not a ladder for Max Weber, not this one. This one is not a ladder metaphor in our textbook. This one is 3 cylinders that, it's actually the same cylinder pictured in 3 different places because the cylinder has 3 different, it's like a pie shape. Think about a pie on the top that's cut into 3 pieces, and then it's this long column. So each of the 3 pieces is the wealth, the power, the prestige. And then you can see the 6 different rungs of the ladder, so to speak, as you rank people from the top of that cylinder to the bottom. So this is in chapter 7 for you to look at. A modern version of Max Weber's concepts that we can fast forward to today is a fellow named Dennis Gilbert. He's the most influential in this modern version. There's a 7-rung ladder that we use 3 factors to classify the people in the United States in modern times, 3 different factors, just like Max Weber did. But the factors are slightly modified. We have this concept called socioeconomic class. And that's the term that we use in the United States to talk about different classes of people. You've heard the word middle class, you've heard the word lower class or upper class. Those are the common words. Those are not the, well, middle class is an academic term, but those other 2 are not, they're too general. We'll talk about how you actually break them down. But socioeconomic class is what we talk about in the United States when we break people down according to these 3 factors. And our 3 factors are a combination of different achieved statuses. Number 1, income is one of the factors that we use to combine into socioeconomic classes. Income, education, which is what you're working on right now, and occupation. What is your occupation type? So we have 3 factors also. They correspond to wealth, power, and prestige, but they're more measurable, more directly measurable. Income, education level, and what is your occupation? So we combine all of those things into conceptual frameworks that we call socioeconomic status. And when you look at the breakdown of the entire population of the United States, when you look at the breakdown using socioeconomic classifications, you end up with 7 rungs on the ladder. 7. You'll find that ladder in Chapter 7 also. On the bottom, you have a class of people in the United States called the Underclass. The Underclass is uneducated, unskilled labor that doesn't have, primarily their upkeep is primarily generated through assistance programs, whether it is a government-sponsored assistant program or a non-governmental organization sponsoring the assistance. The underclass are unskilled or unable of working to the point where the majority of their upkeep during the 12-month cycle comes from support sources like government aid or non-governmental aid. 5% of the U.S. population, according, I think that's a 2014 number, you can check me on that, but roughly 5% of the U.S. population is underclass, based on where does their income come from, how much is it, what are they qualified to do, what's their education level, maybe they stopped going to school in 5th, 6th grade or something like that, maybe they're illiterate so you can't, so they're not really hireable in a lot of cases. And then what is their occupation? Well, they're not hireable, so a lot of times they're only seasonable labor, like maybe they can work, picking tomatoes or something during tomato picking season, something like that that doesn't require literacy skills, but only during that harvest season, for instance, would the individual have gainful employment. Other times of the year, probably most of their income would need to come from government assistance. Okay, so that's 5% of the population. Then the next rung of the ladder, I'm starting from the bottom and going up. The next rung of the ladder is makes up 20% of the U.S. population, roughly 20%, and it's called the working poor. We don't even have the working class yet. It's the working poor. Working poor are earning minimum wages, and they have very unstable jobs. The jobs that they have are dependent very, very much so on the overall health of the economy. So for instance, if you are a car hop at Sonic, but people don't have a whole lot of extra money to spend and they're cooking at home instead, then they probably don't need you to work a car hop at Sonic anymore, and you're probably going to be let go. So you have a very unstable kind of existence. Working poor, that word poor is in the, it's in the title of this socioeconomic class. And so that should tell you that this is a very unstable class of people to be in, socioeconomic class of people to be in. So that category of people, the working poor, makes up about 20% of the population. So we have 7 rungs on our ladder, and I've just told you about the bottom 2, the underclass and the working poor. And that's 5% with the underclass and 20% with the working poor. That's a quarter, 1/4 of our entire population in the United States falls into those 2 categories. Okay, so moving up, we have underclass on the bottom, we have working poor right next to that. Then right above that, that's where we have what's called the working class. And the working class has more stable positions in society. It's still linked to the economy um, quite seriously. You know, people who have skills to offer, people who have positions in society. For instance, a contractor who builds houses, or somebody who works in Detroit on one of the auto lines. You know, you have a specialized skill, and so your wages are much higher than the minimum wage, and you maybe earn benefits through your job and your position. You have some sort of assurance in your job that it's going to be steady. However, when the economy does a downturn and people are keeping their old car rather than buying a new car, then your production company doesn't have to make as many new cars, and they might lay you off for a while where you would be without income. And that skill that you have is not so marketable other places, so you might have difficulty. There's some of the power also that your education or your skill is going to limit you to. So if you don't have a wide variety of things that you are able to qualify for, you might have a very difficult time keeping that position in the working class. And the working class in the United States is 30% of the population. 30%. So we're up to 55% of the population right now on the bottom 3 rungs of the ladder. And we haven't even gotten to a class called middle class yet, that we hear politicians all the time talking about middle class this, shore up the middle class, bolster the middle class, help the middle class. Well, I'm not really sure what they mean by that, because the middle class has been shrinking over the last 20 years or so. And so do they mean they want to just help the people in the middle class stay there, or do they want to help some of that 55% of the people down on the bottom that we've talked about move up? You know, I would like to see, I want to hear them say help the working class, right? Like upward social mobility. But anyway, so the middle class is the next rung of the ladder. It's got 30% of the people in it. Middle class people, if you have a combination of income, occupation, and education, which is our socioeconomic equation: income, occupation, education. Middle class people are college educated, maybe master's degree educated. They have upper level incomes. They have not the highest level income, but they have more stable benefit packages, things like vacation time, things like job assurances that their specialized education level, their higher education level, gives them. And so they have a different sort of style of life and standard of living that's usually the standard of living that is portrayed to most of us in the TV shows that we've been talking about, or movies, or things like this. That's the style of life, that's the standard of living that we see in the media, even though 55% of the population exists in the underclass, the working poor, and the working class. So we get to the middle class, and that is another 30% of the population. So we're up to 85% of our population in just the bottom 4 rungs of this 7-rung ladder. But you can look at the description that your textbook author gives you of all the different positions that go into this class, and it's a combination of a calculation. It's a long algebra equation that looks at income levels, education levels, and occupation, and classifies people into that level. Then you've got upper middle class. Upper middle class is about 14% of the population. That brings us to the 99% point. So we have 5 rungs of the ladder, the bottom 5 rungs, and we're at the 99% of the population. The next highest rung to the middle class is the upper middle class. And it has advanced degrees, advanced positions, managerial positions over like a hospital administrator or something. You know, you're not just a surgeon anymore. You are an administrator over a conglomerate of hospitals or something. So the middle class, the upper middle class, has an even higher level of income, higher level of education. There's fewer of you in society qualified to do that. So your occupation is very steady because I don't have a whole lot to choose from, to get your work done, the work that you can offer. So in the bottom 5 rungs of that ladder, we've got 99% of the U.S. population represented. Yeah, we have 2 more ladders, 2 more rungs to go. So the 2 top rungs of the ladder, the next one above the upper middle class, is called the lower upper class. That's 0.5% of the population. And then the upper class, that's another 0.5% of the population. And the difference between these two is really one of income and prestige. Lower upper class is often considered 1 generation, maybe only 2 generations of wealth, that the individuals can live on the wealth itself and let the wealth do the work to gain more in order to keep their standard of living what their standard of living is. Think of the Kardashians here. They were upper middle class definitely with their attorney father, and then the kind of lower celebrity level of their stepdad. And now they have themselves gained wealth in their lifetime that will sustain. If it continues to grow, then their descendants 3 or 4 generations from now would be considered members of the upper class. And so that's the distinction. So LeBron James is the lower upper class. He's the first generation who has achieved this. And so his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, if they are able to maintain it and allow their wealth to work for them, they will have achieved upper class status. So those are the 2 distinctions there. So that is Dennis Gilbert, who gave us the majority of that concept, the 7-rung ladder that we use in the United States today. It is about socioeconomic classes. Socioeconomics, that is a way of categorizing huge portions of society based on not just one factor, like Karl Marx said income, economics was the whole thing, but socioeconomics is about combining what is your level of income, what is your education level that's linked to what your income is going to be, and then what is your occupation that is linked to the prestige or the social respect that you get from people, and also linked to the education that you have that qualified you for that occupation, and the income level that qualified you for the salary that occupation gets. And all 3 of those are combined into socioeconomic class, and that's the way in the modern U.S. that we live in today that we classify categories of people on a socioeconomic basis. Depending upon where you are on that 7-rung ladder, if you were born to a working class family, there are certain resources, there's a certain style of life, there is a certain standard of living that you experience as a son or daughter of a working class family, and that becomes part of your socialization process. So quite often what we see from one generation to the next, quite often, not 100% of the time, but quite often what we see from one generation to the next is people who are born to a working class family often grow up, they go through their socialization process in that family, in a neighborhood with other working class families, hanging out with kids from other working class families, going to school with children from other working class families, dating people from other working class, marrying people from other working class families, going into professions that are other working class professions. Quite often, that's the cycle of life and generations that exists in reality. So we have this concept of the American dream, where upward social mobility is the goal. Like if we put the work in, we're going to get to go up. But quite often, most of us simply repeat the process that was presented to us in our socialization process. We repeat the life cycle. We repeat the the lifestyle, the education level, the occupation choices, and income similar to those that we were born into. And so this is one of the reasons why some people are very cynical when you talk about the American dream, because they don't really see themselves, maybe, or their neighbors or friends and neighbors, they don't really see themselves moving up on the social ladder. But this is one of the reasons why in chapter 4, when we were talking about achieved status and ascribed status, this is the precise reason why the word class was listed as an ascribed status, something that we're born with or we get involuntarily later in life. If we're born to working class people, we will experience life and go through our early and foundational socialization process as a working class person ourselves. We will begin to think about income, think about education, think about occupation from a working class perspective. We will very likely repeat the working class lifestyle, job choice, income level that we experienced when we were born. The same way for the upper middle class. If you are born to an upper middle class bank president is probably going to send you to college where he went, and you're going to be in the fraternity that he was there, and his fraternity brothers are going to find you a job when you get out, and your college is going to be paid for, and you won't have a debt of student loans, and you're going to be able to start your life in a very different position than what a working class kid did. This is the reality that complicates things, that makes studying this so interesting and often philosophical, to bring in these questions and comments about social stratification and other social institutions that exist in our society and our world today. So this lecture, please rewind. I know I spoke pretty quickly. I'm sorry about that. You know how I can get pretty excited about these things and speed up. But you have the benefit that this is a lecture, a recorded lecture, so you can go back and pause and write down the things that you need to write about. If there is some sort of topic that you have already decided to write about for your reaction paper, go ahead and do that. You do have one more lecture to watch for this week to make up our class time. But this is going to bring us into our next discussion, which we're going to look at the difference between wealth and poverty. We're going to try to define what poverty is. We won't be able to do it without putting some adjectives in front of the word and looking at these concepts of style of life and standard of living. And we're going to do that and start going from just looking at the United States and examining social stratification to looking worldwide and looking at social stratification globally, not just comparing countries to each other, which is kind of a classic model of looking at global stratification. We look at how well is a country doing economically compared to how well is this country doing economically. So we're going to do some of that because that's classically the way that we do, but there's a real shift in sociology lately where we want to look at style of life and standard of living of the people of the country and compare that, the standard of living, the style of life of people in China, for instance, to the standard of living and style of life of people in the United States, right? So we want to look at people, the boots on the ground, what is your life experience like, in addition to the very important concept of how well economically does this country hold up against this country. How industrious, how much imports, exports do they have, that kind of thing. Those are important factors, but from a people's perspective, what's your style of life like compared to somebody across the planet from you right now, and what's their daily life look like? So we will get into that in the next lecture. Thank you very much.